Hi everyone, it's Dr. Wiebrecht here. All right, we're gonna keep going on macro versus micro. So macro sociology is interesting because remember we're looking at those broad institutions, things that are happening in society that are creating a much larger way for us to look at things, right? A lot of times, in order for us to better understand human behavior, we have to look at certain parts of society. Conflict theorists and functionalists love this kind of analysis because we're looking at how there's a ripple effect, almost in a sense, with how we analyze problems and issues in society, or how it can impact certain patterns from a group and might affect relationships overall. So think about this. That sociological significance of social structures is what guides our behaviors, right? Everything that we do is somewhat ingrained at a much larger context of things. So the example here is U.S. social class system, right? We know that our society has these much larger systems, one of which is social class, right? We're looking at the fact that social class is based on somebody's income, education, and occupational prestige, right? So when we have large numbers of people who have similar amounts of income and education, right? These are people that might work at jobs that are roughly comparable in prestige. That makes up a social class. We had talked about the example of middle class and their child rearing techniques, if you recall in the last chapter. So what would this matter when we look at a macro perspective? Consider that individuals from a lower social status might not have as many opportunities available to them versus somebody that maybe has a little bit more prestige or wealth. They might have access to different kinds of schooling or different opportunities that might not be applicable to somebody else at a different level. Now, on the flip side, microsociology places that emphasis on social interaction, or what people do when they come together, right? So symbolic interactionists use this level of analysis. Now, both of these are really important, macro and micro, because they yield distinctive perspectives, right? We're going to be able to gain a much more complete understanding of social life if we're looking at both of these. Sociologists tend to specialize in one of them, but please understand that both of these are very important when we look at how these differences in our behaviors and attitudes are not just biologically based, but we have to look at the location in our social structure and how that might be important. Let me back up here one quick second. I do want to mention in microsociology, we understand again here that an example might be the bro code, right? If guys are together, they might have a specific bro code that maybe guides their behaviors. Hey, you're not going to date this person if I was just in a previous relationship with them. Or, we don't do that because we're friends. That kind of concept. Now, social interaction is an important level of analysis too for us to understand. In microsociology, social interaction sort of guides that concept because it says, what people do when they're in one another's presence. Maybe it's communications at a distance. What are their relationships with their family, their friends, their significant others? All those are important when we look at the language that's used. Certain kind of emphasis on that face-to-face social interaction, right? When you're in the presence of somebody else, what do those social interactions on an everyday level sort of look like? Here's the video for you guys to sort of continue to understand macro versus micro sociology. It's a great little breakdown, so take a moment, click on that link, and review that. All right, so moving on, macro sociology, again, is defined and utilizes something called social structures. Social structures here are those pattern relationships between people that persist over time, right? Think about that. Those behaviors and attitudes are a lot of times determined by our location in a social structure. There are certain components that are very important for us to look at within a social structure: culture, social class, social status, roles, groups, and institutions. We're going to further break some of those down here for you guys so you better understand. But understand that significance of that social structure is what guides our behaviors. People end up learning behaviors and attitudes because of their location in certain structures, right? Think about that. If you're privileged or deprived or in between, you might have different levels of access to things, right? Different belief systems, different values, different behaviors that might guide your day-to-day kind of access to things or places or people, okay? So let's break this down further. The first one is culture. If you remember in chapter 2, we talked about that culture refers to a group's language, their beliefs, their values, their behaviors, and gestures. So this includes material objects used by a particular group, right? It determines what kind of people we're going to become. Your culture says a lot about you in any sense of that. The second is social class. Again, this is based on those three components: income, education, and occupational prestige. Remember those three. You will see those again at some point. So again, remember that large number of people who are going to have similar amounts of income, maybe similar amounts of education, maybe work at jobs that are comparable to each other in prestige. That all makes up a social class. Now, the third one is social status. This refers to a position that an individual occupies, right? A status can carry a great deal of prestige. It could be a judge or an astronaut, or very little, like a gas station attendant or a cook in a fast food restaurant, right? Everybody occupies